Alright guys, hopefully the audio is better with this shit. Yeah. Alright. The communist government of North Vietnam had all its ducks in a row. The march towards socialist principles could commence in earnest. A march did ensue, backward. The unified and independent communist nation of Vietnam suffered terrible economic conditions for several decades, not until the early 1990s, when Vietnam, following Chinese lead, began adopting, quote, communism with a capitalist space, or vice versa. Did the economy begin to show vigorous signs of life? Yeah, but did the economy? Well, this seems like it would be a question. Okay, but fertility sank rapidly before the economy improved. From the high of 7.3 women in 1965, 1970, it dropped to 4.02, 20 years later. The 2000 and 2005 rate is recorded as 2.3, which is just about replacement level for an LCD like Vietnam, whose infant mortality rate has fallen substantially, but is still 5 times higher than that of modern nations. In short, Vietnamese men and women dramatically reduced their childbearing proclivities before economic advance. So here is the state of play about fertility and economic growth. In less developed countries, when the economy is percolating, fertility falls, and when economic growth is sluggish, fertility also goes down. The shorter way to say that is that in less developed countries, fertility is going down, way down. A critical part of the new demography concerns what is called the demographic bonus. Oh, sorry if I'm looking away, because the lens is right there, and I just naturally look over here. I mean, if you're even paying attention to this, that's the reason I'm just so, like, looking just everywhere else. Alright. Where the hell was I? Alright, contrary to earlier days about economic growth in the third world economies, this one bodes well for the poorer nations. The old argument was often presented in elemental terms. Population increases came from 2 basic sources: more old people living longer lives and more babies coming into the world. Few of the elderly and none of the infants are in the productive workforce. As these 2 groups rise relative to the working age population, the per capita gross domestic product either declines as the pie gets cut into smaller slices, or does not rise as rapidly as it would have. Elaborate tables demonstrated that a sharp increase in population would create major demand for more schools, healthcare, housing, and most everything else. How could these demands possibly be met? The population alarmists said that the quickest and surest way to boost the third world economy would be to reduce births. But this view often left out one fairly obvious piece of the economic puzzle. Babies become producers. Suppose in the mythical LCD nations of Ruritania, 1 million children per year are born. 5 years later, there would be 5 million children under the age of 5, minus those infants and children who die before their 5th birthday, because these children are economically inactive, so went the explosionist argument. The per capita GDP would be diminished. But first, modernization brought greater productivity, notwithstanding the appalling level of poverty in most developed countries. The rate of per capita income growth in many LCDs has increased rapidly in recent decades, albeit income growth has actually climbed faster than in more developed countries, as we shall see later. And second, 15 to 20 years after the birth of those mythical 5 million babies, they aren't babies anymore. They are potential young workers. They can work, and most of them do, despite high unemployment rates. They add to the GDP, and more than is generally assumed, because so many are workers laboring in the unofficial GNP, often working underground or off the books. Many taxpayers. many pay taxes, sorry. A famous Indian demographer noted that, quote, every baby is born with a mouth and hands. A baby not only consumes when young, but produces later on. Meanwhile, as we have seen, LCD fertility has dropped substantially. Instead of 5 million babies and children under the age of 5 in Ruritania, there are now only, say, 3 million such infants and children. The dependency ratio has improved. There are fewer unproductive children, drawing down family and governmental expenditures. The demographic bonus has arrived, and this process will continue as long as fertility continues to fall. This is exactly what is happening in the LCDs. Fertility has indeed fallen sharply, and all projections indicate that it will continue to fall. Accordingly, production should rise. The familiar rhetorical rebuttal to this view is often as simple as it is wrong. Some ask, but where will all the jobs come from? How can we create the jobs? The answer is, there is no we, because most of the jobs are created by, quote, them. The people and the entrepreneurs, local or from outside the nation, not by we, the governments, the economists, the planners. Adults need housing and food. The people in the LCDs want television and bicycle, if not a motor scooter or a car. They work to gain that for themselves and their families, and they do so unless rigid governmental economic policies and corruption strangle economic growth. Unfortunately, an all too familiar story in the past, but getting better. As parents have fewer children, they can provide better education for those children. The next generation is more literate and more productive. To a point, a fall in fertility can engender a vicious circle. If economic progress and per capita income is a sole variable, a family with 2 or 3 children will do better than a family with 5 or 6 children. An income of $100 each month in a family unit of 5 children yields about $14 per capita. The 100 in a family unit of 3 children yields $20 per capita income, almost a 50% increase. But the simple decrease in fertility is not a panacea, and never was. There are too many examples of nations that have fared very well with very high fertility rates. The nation with the largest population explosion in history has been the United States, growing from 4 million to nearly 300 million in 210 years, while becoming the world's prosperous nation. The question before the House today, can a virtuous cycle turn into a vicious cycle? In the LCDs, there is a commercial answer and an apocalyptic answer. One big part of the commercial answer is that things grow dicey when the fat cohorts of the baby boom age. Among the modern nations, that happens when baby boomers born after World War II reach retirement age, and there are few workers bees to pay as you go retirement systems. That process is just beginning in those modern countries where relatively early ages of retirement. 60 years from the end of the World War II in 1945 puts us at 2005 now. Among the less developed countries, this will happen decades later, because the decline in fertility began later, and their populations will reach retirement ages later. But it will happen. Alright, Chapter 4. America the Exceptional. The Baby Makers. Okay. 3 are more developed countries. There are less developed countries, and there is the United States. Demographically, as in so many other ways, America is different. The rich countries have very low fertility rates and populations that will shrink. The poor countries have sharply fallen fertility rates. The populations that will grow for a while, but more slowly than expected. America fits into neither category. America is a rich country, the only one that is growing and has a fertility rate that is almost at the replacement level. America continues to grow robustly for 2 reasons. Apparently, we have not lost the knack of having babies, and we still become a reasonable number of foreigners. We welcome a reasonable number of foreigners to our shores or residents. Officially, the United States is a statistical subset of the UN's category of, quote, more developed regions. But America's differences from the rest of the West are major. Perhaps the United States deserves the UN designation of its own, just as China has one. The World Population Prospects volumes have a special category of data for less developed regions, including China. Actually, recently, China has now become a developed country, I believe, which is interesting, seeing all this stuff play out. I think I've said that before, but still interesting. All right. If the UN were to publish easily accessible data of more developed regions, including the United States, the remarkable story of modern America demographics would be much more clearly. It would be seen much more clearly. All right. So there's this graph, and if you guys want me to show the graphs in like separate posts from the reading, I will, but might just do it on my own. But yeah, feedback is good, I guess. All right. The U.S. total fertility rate children per woman 1950 to 2002, and the chart is just like 3.45, and then towards 1975 to 1980 is when it drops like a lot comparatively to 1950. Obviously, it just goes down, and then now it's just under replacement. All right. How is America different? Let us count the ways. Big. America is the only significant populous country in the West. The UN in 2000 showed America with 285 million people. By 2005, the American population should be about 300 million, growing moderately but solidly. To that can be added a few million more, in part because America is one of the few nations without a national identity and registration procedure, typically yielding an undercount in census data. Although the Census Bureau has been improving its enumeration procedures. The next largest truly modern country is Japan. It had a population of 127 million people in 2000 to 2005 range, well below Russia's 145 million and somewhat less than half the American number. Russia is already losing population. Japan will follow shortly. Both nations have steeply aging populations. By mid-century, remember, America will grow to about 400 million people, to about 4 times the number than expected in Japan, and aging more slowly. In the year of 2000, the population of all Europe, stretching from Ireland to Siberia, including 47 nations, was 728 million people. By 2050, according to the UN medium variant projection, European population is estimated to be 632 million, a drop of 96 million people and falling rapidly, and perhaps significantly fewer, as we have seen and shall see again. The medium variant may not be the right way to look at Europe. In short, Europe down 100 million, America up 100 million. The further out one goes, the more stark the difference is. Unless we know something will change, of which there is no evidence yet, it is not hard to get to a time when the United States will be more populous than Europe. Now, granted, many things could change, and probably will. As Herbert Stein, my late colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, wrote, a trend that can't continue won't. It's not likely that Europe will fall to 0 people at a certain date. On the other hand, in the next world of demographics, remarkable occurrences do happen. For example, the 7-5-fold increase in the U.S. population over the course of 200 years. Fecund to none. One of the serious nations of developed world, America, has the highest TFR, and about 2 children per woman, almost the replacement rate. We shall see if this will last. What happened? For a while, it seemed as if America would follow the European track of hyper-low fertility. In 1976, the year of America's bicentennial, the TFR in the United States was 1.7 children per woman, in an economically unhappy time. How low was that? For the record, that number was below the then-current rate of France, 1.9, and Japan, 1.8. The all-Europe rate was 2.0. America, along with its modern counterpart nations, seemed to be heading into the same demographic ditch. In the roughly quarter century since then, total fertility rates are most all other modern nations have indeed fallen further. These included the settler nations of Canada and Australia, probably the two most similar to the United States in demographic structure. But the TFR in America didn't stay up. It went up. It didn't stay down. It went up. Why? This should be an interesting demographic speculation for any nation behaving in such a quirky way. When it happens to the sole superpower, never more influential than now, it should have become important news. The United States in 1975 to 1980 was in the midst of what was then thought of as an economic implausibility, stagflation. The gross national product was erratic, with two recessions, two inflations, yet inflation soared. Could America's drop to 1976 TFR of 1.7 have been a reflection of the economic trouble? It would seem so. What could be worse for a young couple than high interest rates on the mortgage, high cost of goods and services, while the real value of wages diminishes under the crush of inflation? With odd even days of gas lines for fuel at high prices? Is that a preposterous time, propitious time to bear a first child? Is it a smart time to bear a second child? So that's probably part of the answer. But how much apart? American fertility peaked in 1957 when the baby boomers were being born at a TFR of 3.8 children per woman. The TFR then declined steadily to 3.65 in 1960 and to 2.9 in 1965, going to 2.5 in 1970 and 2.1, just below replacement, in 1972. These were generally healthy economic times as the TFR was reduced by almost half, and rates were coming down in most of all modern nations regardless of how their respective economies were faring. Why? For many reasons we will discuss later, including feminism, the education of women, working women, contraception, abortion, and urbanization. Alrighty then. What is more interesting is what happened after 1976. Slowly, very slowly in the beginning, American fertility began to rise. By 1980, the rate was 1.84, an increase of 1/10 of a child per woman from 1.74 of 1976. By 1985, it was still 1.84. Still, in the European range, oh, sorry,